have a very special guest with me. I have Amanda Kinkade in the house, and she is a broker with Kinkade Commercial Real Estate. So we have something new today. We're going to talk about commercial real estate. So I'm really excited about that because we're always talking about residential real estate. So Amanda, she has her own commercial real estate company called Kinkade Commercial Real Estate. She's had it for about 2 years now, and she is in the Jacksonville, Florida area. I will say she's married, she has 3 daughters, and she's done, when she was working with others, she had over $45 million total transactions. So I'm sure it's way past that now. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit, I think it's rather probably, I remember growing up, commercial real estate was the man's world. So what was that like getting involved in commercial real estate as a woman, or was there anything?
So, when I started, I originally worked for a real estate developer in residential. And so when I transitioned back in 2007 into commercial real estate, it was completely different. And like you said, it was pretty much a man's world. And I worked for a small boutique firm with Duke Addison, and I basically learned right hand from him and watched. And at that time, we had about 10 agents. And I was one of 2 women in the office. So it was really like a man's world. And Mike Lucas was my sales agent at the time, or I'm sorry, sales manager. And he really guided me and showed me what to do, because it's almost like speaking a new language when you get into commercial real estate.
Totally. Did you ever try residential real estate?
So when I worked for the developer, I was basically a site agent. So I was a site agent for the Devlin Group, and I sat on site just selling his product. So that's as much residential experience as I got. So it was really a huge transition.
So were you doing that first and then you transitioned?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that like?
With the developer?
To switch
over. Oh,
because they're so different.
Oh, it took probably 2 years of really understanding and just acquiring as much knowledge as possible.
But you liked it.
But I loved it, yes. I loved it because I found it to be very, very challenging. And I found that every deal was so different. It wasn't the same. Every deal was different, whether it was a sales transaction or a leasing transaction or a development deal. I mean, it was just very different. And I loved how it was so different, and you're learning with each deal.
It's true. I remembered, I've always done residential.
Mm-hmm.
However, there was a time where a friend of mine had an office building out at the beaches and asked me to list it.
Uh-huh.
And she said either sell it or rent it, whatever. I'm like, okay. I knew it was a challenge, and I told her I've not done this, but I'm up for it. I was miserable. I was miserable. I couldn't, it was not my wheelhouse at all. And it was just such a different, it's a different game.
It is.
And I said, this is not for me. So finally, it was a mutual parting of the ways.
That is
so if you have a house to sell, I can help you there.
Yes.
But now whenever I get anybody who calls me for commercial, I always refer them because they are just so different.
It is. And it really takes a lot of patience. I find that each one of our deals can take, very long, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So you really have to have patience and persistence and make sure that all the parties are still excited about the opportunity and moving forward. So it's very
It is a
different.
process. I mean, ours are in 2 months, you've got your new house.
Right.
Now, this is 2 months and we just met for the first time.
Right,
So,
right.
Yeah, that's different. So you do both leasing and sales, is that right?
Yes.
Do you have a preference for one over the other? Is one easier, harder?
I enjoy both. I will tell you, with leasing, it can be just as lucrative and fun as a sales deal, as a sales transaction. However, I really think it's important, whether you represent the landlord or the tenant, they each need some sort of representation. Because if you're a brand new business owner, for instance, and you're going into an office, you're going to get a lease agreement in terms that you don't really even know.
True.
So it really takes someone, at least speaking with someone that's experienced, whether it's a real estate attorney or a commercial broker that's involved in it every day. Because depending on the lease, in the type of property you're going in, you could have a full service lease, kind of like in the building we're in right now, or a modified gross lease, or then you see triple net leases. And so when you talk to a business owner for the first time that's looking to lease, they really need some guidance in, okay, what's included in my rent, what's not included, what should I expect? Because if they're not, told up front, then they can really, when they're in their lease term, they can be lost. So they really need some guidance.
That's so true. That's so true. And just the terms alone, I mean, you have to explain it all. It's like you mentioned triple net, and there's the CAM, and
Right.
and I
Yes.
remember when I first got involved in real estate, and I heard the word CAM when it came to relating to an office space. Well, I was totally thrown off because CAM to me meant Community Association Manager, which was the first license that I got. I
Yes.
manage HOAs, and that was like, no, that's not what we're talking about here.
Right.
So
Yes.
there's all kinds of things. So you definitely want to have somebody who works on your behalf, and it's so different, like you said, for the tenant and for the landlord. So it depends on who you're representing. Now you also do sales, right?
I do sales, yes.
Okay. So what are rents and sales? Are they up or down? How's it looking right now?
So with Jacksonville in general, I mean, we're still growing, which is wonderful in our market. I mean, we're, I think, one of the top in Florida, or if not the top, that's growing every year.
In office space?
Well, in general, as a
Okay.
demographic.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
as Jacksonville as a market total. But in office leases, I'm seeing prices, they're staying pretty steady. The vacancies are going down, which is good, especially downtown with all of the changes that are happening. You have more people excited about possibly expanding to a downtown location, or I'm talking to a lot of out-of-town businesses that are looking to relocate to Jacksonville, and they're considering downtown, even though historically we've had challenges with parking and that sort of thing. So now we're seeing some changes downtown, especially with the city and the landing and everything that's happening. So there's some excitement.
Are there any, I remember when they first became popular, now they're everywhere, but is there a more, or is there a decline in the office spaces that you purchase?
No, I think with interest rates being really competitive, especially in the commercial side, you're seeing these business owners that are sick of paying rent, especially the annual increases, because standard in Jacksonville, an escalation for your lease every year is anywhere from 3 to 5% per year, because those landlords want to see it escalate. And they just get sick, and then when renewal time comes, if your landlord is being a little bit more aggressive with you, you see those business owners that have been in business for 2 years or longer that are like, you know what, I can go ahead and buy an office condo, which are still really affordable. You can see them, in Mandarin or in the South Side area. I think, they're close to, they're less than $200 a square foot.
So if somebody is thinking, maybe I'll buy a building instead of renting anymore, what are some things that they should prepare themselves for?
So if
like
it's
down payments and all of
Yeah,
that, what
sure.
Because those loans are different than.
They are definitely different.
So tell us what we need to know about that.
So you need to be prepared if you're looking to buy. You need to be prepared. You need to be in business for 2 years or longer, and make sure that your business financials, they're showing a gain and not a loss. And that you have some cash flow in reserves, you're ready to go as far as that. And depending on the type of property, if it's just a standard commercial office, they like to see at least 20% down to go conventional. You could do SBA loans. There's a lot of providers here with the bigger banks or the smaller community banks that provide SBA. So there's some options there as well that are still really affordable with low interest rates. But that's kind of on the financing side, what they should prepare for. And depending on if it's an investor that likes to buy cash, because I still deal with a lot of investors, especially out of town coming in, they're looking at Jacksonville as affordable and compared to other markets, and they like the cash flow. They see that there's a potential for cash flow and a return in the long term.
Are these investors local or not local? Are they from the United States, or are they from all over the world?
They're all over the world, but mostly the ones that I've dealt with are not in our market, but they are from the U.S. But I've also spoken to some that are from outside of the U.S. as
Because
well.
even though the interest rates are super low, and that's why they're here.
Right.
They're still getting more return, even at, what is it, 1.9% or something like that. The Feds just did. I don't remember. I just studied it just the other day, and they just get more bang for their buck here.
They do. And I'm seeing the average cap rate in our market is like over 8%, which is really good. That's over 8% return that I'm seeing these investors buy.
Where else are you going to get that?
Right. So it's really exciting. I love working with real estate investors too, and representing on the landlord side, because you also have to educate them. They're the property that they buy and the type of user that's allowed per the zoning, who can go into my building.
Is that usually a
what type of
problem?
use.
When somebody wants something, they got a zoning problem?
Yes, it depends on the county. If it's a PUD zoning, you'll really have to look and see what's permissible within the PUD. But if it's typical commercial, I know business owners that have bought a property and they did not do their due diligence.
Oh, no.
And they've opened business, and the city comes out and finds them and says you have to close down because you're not zoned properly. So that's another reason why to talk to an expert, because
Absolutely, and people don't realize it. So let's talk about the benefits of using a commercial broker to represent you. Either it's a lease or purchase. Why do we want a broker to represent us?
So if it's a lease or purchase, it's always helpful to have a free market analysis. They sit down and say, okay, what side of town do you want to be in? What type of business are you in? What's your true demographic? Because, if you're a medical user, is it best to be close to a hospital, or is it to go into a brand new growing area like St. Johns County, where you want to capture a certain, maybe you're a pediatrician, you want,
A lot of families.
Right. So you need to really understand your demographic, where you're going, and you also need to understand, the zoning. Okay, I like this property over here. Am I zoned correctly? And what's the process going to be like? How is a lease? And so
So do you, as the agent for this person, check into all those zonings and permitting?
Right. It's always, if it's a really particular use, like for instance, the cannabis, the new use coming, around, you might need to really consult and maybe talk to someone in the zoning department just to be sure. I like to do that, just to verify for my owner and for me that we're making the right decision. We're not putting all this time into a deal that's not going to go right.
Yeah, not gonna
So, because I've been down that road before.
Yeah, we learn one time and we're done.
Yes,
yeah.
right. Yeah. So you want to just be sure. You just want to be sure on both the landlord and the tenant. You want to make sure.
So what else do you see? What do you see happening with? I see a lot of shopping centers. The old school. It's funny to say old school, but I was at one today, a mall. An old-fashioned mall, and you see a lot of empty stores. What do you see happening with these shopping centers?
So, for instance, the town center, we saw the Best Buy relocate and close, and then the toy store close. What that landlord and his team are doing is really trying to target something different. So you're seeing now organic grocers going in, and I think Town Center is now targeting the Lego store. They're getting a little bit more creative as far as their
You're talking about
demographic.
the outdoor malls.
Yes.
What about these indoor malls?
Oh, the indoor malls. Well, like Regency Square Mall, for example. They're
all of them.
Right.
They're
trying to target big church
So they're trying to repurpose them.
Absolutely. Or redevelopment is another opportunity. So maybe what we're seeing a trend now is neighborhood centers. So maybe there's mixed use where you have retail and then maybe you have residential as well. So you have a little bit of both, a both component. Or you're seeing
That's
a little bit of
definitely
redevelopment.
Yes.
Yes, I'm seeing a lot of that. Because it can kind of cater to the area a little bit better. Instead of seeing these big box malls, I'm seeing more of that. More of neighborhood centers.
It's hard to be in retail these days. It's hard to survive when it's so much easier just to go online. And I remember
Amazon.
the day when you would go online. This is aging me. When we would go, how are you going to make any money on this computer?
Oh, I know.
Now it's like you can buy. And I remember back there was some guy was talking on the radio or on TV or something about he was going to try to survive for 1 year, or maybe it was even just 6 months, not leaving his house just to see what he could do online. This was before, Grubhub and DoorDash and all these other places were out there. So,
Really?
but
Wow.
now look at this. It's like you don't ever have to leave your house.
I know, and you can't live without your computer now.
No,
You know?
no. It's like we talk about our phones, and our phone isn't a phone; it's a computer.
It really is.
So, what other trends do you see happening in office spaces and businesses?
So I see a lot of, like I had mentioned earlier, neighborhood centers where you're seeing in some of these developments like Oakleaf Village and Nocatee, more of the grocers coming in and more of the smaller scale retail like you were talking about.
Yes.
Where it's making it more convenient for the neighbors to just go grab a pizza. They can walk. They don't want to go all the way down to the major retail center to go do something. You're going to see more of these little neighborhood strip centers popping up, which is going to benefit, the neighbors, and maybe for real estate investors that are just trying to get into the market, or maybe they don't want something so risky. They start on a smaller scale with a strip center.
The problem is that the land is so expensive for these. It's like we keep saying we'd love to have a Chick-fil-A out here. Chick-fil-A is not going to pay for that land, Or in fact, we have. Here's a lead for you.
Okay.
We've got in Nocatee, there's the Del Webb community.
Right.
And the Del Webb community, they're building a new Del Webb because they've sold out of the original one. And in the original one, it is getting ready to be turned over to the residents because the developer's all done. So they have this office at the very beginning before you have to go through the guard gates, and it was their sales office. It's very large and very nice. And I kept thinking, what are they going to do with this? What are they going to do? They got to do something. They're not going to bulldoze it. And there's no golf anything there, like a driving range. It would certainly be nice if we could get someone to lease it as a restaurant.
Oh.
So I don't know if that's a lead or not, but that's a personal want.
Well, I know restaurants are so tricky because I have people that, I have a center right now going on in Clay County, and everybody wants a restaurant because it's one of these neighborhood centers. But you have to be careful with parking because parking is a huge issue depending on the type of restaurant. If it's not a quick serve and you're sitting down for a meal, there's parking, and being so close to the neighbors, sometimes there could be some pushback with neighbors depending on how much traffic will come in. If you put a Metro Diner right there, or Maple Street, there could be, because they could, with all the
So
parking
there's things
and
to
the
consider
traffic.
when
Yes, there is.
and that's not just for what we were just talking about, this one building, but
Right.
for any building, you
For
have to
any.
think about
Yes.
those things. There's all kinds of legal zoning for, you have to have so many handicap places
That's
to
correct.
park in for each, I guess, square foot that you
Right.
have, or
And
not
so
sure.
many parking spaces per the use, there has to be a certain amount. So it can get kind of tricky, but that's why it takes like a commercial broker on the landlord's behalf to tell them to kind of weed out the inquiries and say, well, that wouldn't be a good fit because of the tenant mix or because of the parking limitations.
Yeah.
Medical too is another one with big parking requirements. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and also there's all the requirements for handicapped, and there's all those new laws. So, well, they're not new anymore, but
Right.
for older buildings, they're new.
Right, absolutely.
And costly.
Yes.
And very costly. So tell me a little bit about build out, how that works.
So, in a retail scenario, typically the landlord will give some sort of allowance depending on the type of use that's going in. So, if it's a medical use that's popular, maybe an orthodontist going into a strip center, and it's a credible tenant, then the landlord will give an allowance. I'm seeing anywhere from $15 to $20 to $30, especially for a really credible medical use to go in. On the office side, on the flip side, if you're really seeing landlords will do an all-in build out. I have a building downtown where the landlord, if it's a credible, maybe it's a law office going into a building, and they are credit worthy, they will do a turnkey build out. They will down to the carpet, the paint, just to get this tenant in.
There you go.
And it all depends on the lease term too, and the amount of rent. So if the rent goes down, the lease term's short, you're not going to get a lot.
You're not going to get the goodies.
Right.
What is a typical lease run for? by run for, I mean the
term.
length of time.
Yeah, 3 to 5 years is typical in Jacksonville. So anything less than 3 years, you won't get landlords. They're going to look at you and say, oh, I mean, there's really no commitment. After I replace the carpet for you and repaint, what am I going to have? So really, 3 years is minimum.
Now, are they usually with the options to renew, or is that not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you can do. And sometimes you can get, they call it free rent, but really it's deferred rent up front.
Yes. It's like, we're going to get you on the back end.
Yes, we're still going to get you on the back end, but you have some time up front to move. They'll even do free rent or some deferred rent during the lease term too, depending on the deal. So.
And you want to make sure that, I remember many years ago when we were renting some space, there were some terms in there that we overlooked that were really bad that we overlooked. And it had to do with that renewal. So, and sometimes it says automatically renewed, and if you don't give us notice, and other times it's you must give us notice or you're not automatically renewed, and you can find yourself on the street.
Right. Yeah, and you have to really look at your holdover clause, because if you don't give the proper notice, they can hold you to whatever the percentage of the holdover clause. It could be, double your rent depending on the landlord. So it's really, really important to look at your lease terms and the HVAC maintenance and who's going to pay for that.
Responsible for the breaks.
Yes, because
things go wrong.
Right, and you can always cap. A lot of tenants don't know, but even in a retail scenario where the tenant is supposed to pay for the HVAC, which is typical, you can always cap it and say, well, I'm only going to pay such and such a quarter. You pay for the rest. This is your building. And so you can negotiate either way.
That's true. That's true. So just don't ever forget that you can negotiate.
Yes.
I talk about that all the time. You can negotiate right up to the end. So this has been really awesome. Is there anything that we have not covered that is super important that we need to cover here? It's like, I think we've covered pretty much all the hot topics with commercial real estate.
Yeah.
And so if our audience needs to reach you, how do they get in touch with you, Amanda?
So my website is kinkadecommercial.com, and that's spelled differently. It's Kinkad, like the painter Thomas Kinkade, but there's no relation. So it's Kinkade Commercial, or they can reach me directly, 904-635-6376, or Amanda@kinkadecommercial.com.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us today on Real Estate Talk. And that's our show for today. So until next time, this is Zelda. Don't forget to subscribe.